We're going to move forward with the first question, and Ángel Pedrero will make that question. Mr. Pedrero.
Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, Dr. Alameel, Senator Cornyn. The first question goes to Senator Cornyn. New records show that last year immigration officials released some undocumented immigrants who had faced serious criminal charges, such as kidnapping, sexual assault, drugs, trafficking, and homicide. If you would be reelected, what would be your priority? Getting done a comprehensive immigration reform or finding an additional funding to capture and send back to the countries to the criminals that were released?
I am a strong supporter of immigration reform because I believe there is no one, regardless of their position on this sometimes contentious issue, who believes that our immigration system is working the way it should. I support an immigration system that reflects our values and also protects our interests as a nation. Right now, our system is one of chaos, largely controlled by the criminal organizations that get rich off of ferrying people in and out of our country. These are the same people who traffic in drugs and traffic in human beings, and basically their business is misery, human misery. So we need to restore our immigration system to a legal one because we are the most generous country in the world. We naturalize almost 1 million people a year. But we need to shut down the cartels that traffic in human misery and restore order to what is now chaos through a system that reflects both our values and our interests.
The next question is from Pedro Rojas. Pedro, go ahead.
Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, Senator, and good evening, Mr. Alameel. The question is for you, actually. Now that those releases by Immigration and Customs Enforcement are known, these controversial releases of undocumented immigrants that have some criminal background, if you're elected as a senator, what would you do to prevent this type of errors from happening again?
Well, of course, although I am a very supporter of immigration reform, it's for people who are hardworking and law-abiding. People who commit crimes should be deported immediately and should be sent back to their country. And I don't believe that we should tolerate any criminal activity or any people who commit a criminal act. But most of the Latinos here who are undocumented are people who have been here for many, many years, people who are very hardworking, God-fearing, pro-family. And these people, some of them have been here for many, many years, are married, have children and grandchildren, and I believe that they deserve a path to citizenship, and I believe that they deserve the same path to the American dream as every other community. And I will fight with tooth and nail to let them have that.
Your time is up. And now, next question is from Julieta Hernandez. Julieta.
Thank you, Wendy. Welcome, Senator Cornyn and Dr. Alameel. These questions go for both. The Immigration and Nationality Act allows for the United States to award 175,000 visas each year. Do you believe that increasing the amount of visas allowed each year will benefit the country? And if so, how many visas will you be willing to approve for this program?
And as it was decided on the coin toss, Mr. Cornyn will answer first.
Well, I think we shouldn't set a hard cap on the number of visas. I think it depends, frankly, on how well our economy is doing. If our economy is doing well and we have full employment for people, American citizens, then I think we could look at a more flexible cap that would reflect the demand for legal workforce here in the United States. But we do have, as I said earlier, an immigration system that does not even protect our national interests. We educate at colleges like Mountain View College and other colleges across the country, people who have skills and talents that we need in the United States. And so I support increasing the number of visas, particularly for those who have the kinds of skills that we can't currently find. About half of our engineering students are foreign-born, and it makes no sense whatsoever to, given the demand we have in our country for these highly skilled individuals, to send them back to their country of origin because we put some kind of artificial cap on that.
Mr. Alameel.
Yes. Of course, we need to increase quotas, but that will never take care of our Latino communities. We have 11 million undocumented people here who've been here for many, many years. And immigration reform should immediately give them permanency, and they should give them a path to citizenship for those who've been here for many years, and we need that reform now. We wait on quotas, it'll take us 100 years to give the relief that our Latino community deserves.
Next question is from Ángel Pedrero.
Thank you, Wendy. This question goes to Senator Cornyn. According to the New York Times, about 200,000 parents of children who are American citizens were deported between 2010 and 2012. And 5,000 parentless children are now in foster care because their mother or father was detained or deported. Are you able to put yourself in those parents' shoes? What would you do if you were one of them?
Well, we know that people come to the United States for opportunity and for the American dream that we've spoken about before. What I've always said is nobody supports the status quo on our immigration system. I don't think anyone's happy with it. So the issue is, how do we find some consensus? And I think the way we begin to do that is to find a way to break this down into smaller pieces, because frankly, there's so much distrust and division in Washington, D.C. these days. It's hard, if not impossible, to pass a comprehensive bill that does everything. And as we've seen, the delay, I think, makes my point, that if we'd been able to do it, we would have already done it. I introduced a comprehensive immigration reform bill in 2005 with Senator John Kyle of Arizona. But like all of the other comprehensive bills, they haven't gone anywhere. So that's why I think it's so important. Let's find the parts of it that we agree on. The children who came with their parents.
Your time is up, sir. If Mr. Alameel doesn't want to rebuttal, we're moving forward to the next question.
No, I do. The only time he voted for immigration reform is when he knew that the House was not even going to consider it. It is inhuman and anti-Christian to separate kids from their parents. That's why immigration reform is needed as of yesterday, as of last year, as of 10 years ago. The only way to solve this problem is to stop deportation and keep these families together until we figure out exactly what immigration reform is going to look like.
Next question is from Pedro Rojas.
Mr. Alameel, as a veteran of the U.S. Army, are you in favor of the deployment of the National Guard to the Texas-Mexico border? And if so, could you explain why?
Well, I think it's a joke because it's just a political ploy. We need to secure our border for many reasons, but it's not the National Guard who should take care of our border. It's the federal government that needs to take care of our border. Texans should not bear the cost of securing our country's border. The federal government should. And I believe we should secure it because we have cartels, we have enemies around the world. It won't take very long before they start figuring out that our southern border is wide open for terrorists to come in. So I do believe it needs to be secured, but you know what Rick Perry did was just a political ploy. It's not going to work. They don't have any authority to arrest anybody. They don't have any authority to do anything, and I think it's time for our federal government to take care of our border.
Well, given the fact that the President refused to even visit the Rio Grande Valley during this humanitarian crisis, that's what he called it, and it really was a crisis. My visits down there showed that the Border Patrol and local officials were overwhelmed by the flood of unaccompanied children, 62,000 since just October alone. They didn't have adequate detention facilities. And I remember one young man who we asked, and he was being detained at the Border Patrol facilities there in squalid conditions. I asked him how old he was. He said he was 13. I asked him where his parents were, and he said they're dead. That young man could qualify for an immigration visa in the United States if he was able to appear in front of an immigration judge on a timely basis and make that claim. I worked with Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Laredo, Texas, to try to offer a bipartisan solution to just this little piece of our broken immigration system, and we couldn't even get a vote from the majority leader, Senator Reid, in the United States Senate, and the President said he would veto it if we sent it to him. That's not a way to solve the problem.
Your time is up, sir. Julieta Hernandez has the next question.
Senator Cornyn, you have supported expanding aid for low-income students and student loan reform. Do your future education policies include advocating for federal aid for low-income students that have benefited from the DREAM Act?
Well, I believe that education is the key, is the way out. And I've indicated earlier that for children who came with their parents and into the country and did not comply with our immigration laws, they are guilty of nothing other than coming with their family. And we ought to provide them an opportunity not only to go to school, but to eventually serve in the military or complete a college education and earn an American citizenship. I believe that. And I believe in the process they should be treated just the same as we would any other student based on need. It makes so much more sense for us to have these young people here in Texas and here in America as productive citizens. It makes absolutely no sense to condemn them to minimum wage jobs for the rest of their lives when they could produce so much more, when they could be so much more, and they would benefit, their families would benefit, and our nation would benefit.
Our Federal Reserve has given Wall Street $3.2 trillion in the last 5 years at 1/4%. And yet, our children has the burden of student loans, and they're paying anywhere from 5 to 7%. And when Elizabeth Warren introduced a bill to reduce the interest payment on our students, John Cornyn voted against it. If he really cares about education, he should tell the country that our education should be practically free and our students should not have to have loans, much less pay 7%. At least they should pay only 1/4%, just like Wall Street corporations do.
Next question is from Ángel Pedrero.
Thank you, Wendy. This question is for Dr. Alameel. According to the Dallas Morning News, about 10 years ago, you gave money to Senator Cornyn's campaign. What did Senator Cornyn have at the time that prompted you to support him that you would say he no longer has?
Well, he was only 2 years into his office and had no record. And of all the things that I have to live with in my life, and I stand by all my mistakes, this is one terrible mistake I have to live with.
Well, I would say to Dr. Alameel, he was an enthusiastic supporter of mine and of Governor Perry's and Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst and Republicans up and down the ticket. He decided, for reasons I'm sure he can explain, to switch parties and to run as a Democrat. He ran in an 11-person primary, came in fourth, spending $4.5 million of his own money. He's decided to self-finance this race. I enjoy the support of 17,000 Texans who contributed to my campaign. Dr. Alameel's primary campaign contributor is Dr. Alameel. And so he has that right, and I'm glad he is here tonight and making his case for election to the American people. But I would say that people can judge for themselves whether he is being consistent or inconsistent. His actions match his words. I would suggest they do not.
Next question is from Pedro Rojas.
This question is for both. Senator Cornyn and Mr. Alameel, if elected, what would you do to secure the border and avoid the humanitarian crisis like the one that we saw in the summer? And how can we prevent those massive amount of children coming by themselves and mothers with children?
This time, Mr. Alameel will begin.
Okay. Well, I already stated exactly how I would like to secure our border. It's a federal government job, and I will fight for that as your senator. These people are coming because they have strife in their country. They're killing their parents. They're killing them if they join gangs. One of the things we have to do is that when we give them financial aid, we have to put conditions on them. We can't allow the leaders of that country to go and squander the financial aid that we give them. And we do business with them. We can put pressure on them to stop the killing with the cartel in their country, to stop the abuse and the corruption in their government, so they can provide a better life for their country. As far as the border is concerned, it has nothing to do with a humanitarian crisis on the border. It has to do with our national security.
Mr. Cornyn, you have 1 minute.
Well, we know how to do this. We just haven't had the political will to do it. And actually, this is one of the problems with a so-called comprehensive approach, that it's viewed as everything is connected to everything else. And when you insist on everything your way or nothing, most of the time you get nothing. And so what we need to do is to make the commitment in terms of federal resources. I'm talking about people, technology, but mainly it's a matter of national will. We know how to do this. But we also need to separate the people who are the cartels and the drug running and the human trafficking from the legitimate traffic and trade. We benefit to the tune of 6 million jobs in America from binational trade with Mexico. But we haven't funded our ports of entry, and we haven't staffed those ports of entry in a way that would allow us to separate the legal and the beneficial from the illegal and the harmful. And then I think once we decide what sort of legal guest worker program and other
Your
visa
time is
systems.
up, sir. Excuse me. Julieta Hernandez has the next question.
These questions go for both Dr. Alameel and Senator Cornyn. If elected as a Texas senator, what concrete action will you take to make your office more accessible to student population and to motivate those students to get involved and express their needs?
This time, Mr. Cornyn will begin. You have 1 minute.
Well, one reason I'm very happy to be here at Mountain View College tonight is because I think a lot of students who perhaps haven't been as involved in the political process get a chance to see firsthand what it's like. And hopefully this will be the beginning of their active engagement over the course of their lives, because we have a unique form of government, and because the government is us. We're the ones who decide who gets elected and what the policies will be based on how we vote and if we vote. And so I think students have a vested interest. Unfortunately, your generation has not been treated very well by the current office holders, and there's plenty of blame to go around. But right now, there's absolutely no discussion about the $17 trillion in debt that's going to have to be paid back, and the unsustainable Social Security and Medicare systems that we know how to fix. We know how to keep those commitments to our seniors and future generations, but there seems to be absolutely no commitment under the current leadership to fix them.
I would like to make a question to both of you. And this time, Mr. Alameel will answer first. We have been hearing a lot about Ebola. What would you do differently at the legislation to deal with the Ebola crisis? Would you approve legislation to prohibit flights from Ebola-stricken countries to come to the U.S.? Mr. Alameel.
Well, the Ebola problem is the same problem we have that he says there is no political will in Washington to fix. Retirement, education, and everything else that we need. He doesn't have an open-door policy. He didn't answer that question. The reason Ebola is a big problem because they keep cutting funding to every agency that we need. And CDC was not ready to handle an epidemic. Our hospitals were not ready to handle our epidemic, and we totally bungled that whole incident, and we have doctors and nurses and patients going around with fluids infected, and they're allowing them to fly, they're allowing them to sit in rooms. Yes, we need to restrict flying. In any epidemic, you have to restrict the flow in and out of that epidemic area. But I think start to fund our emergency healthcare response is more important than anything else, and making the screening more strict at airports will help that a long way.
Your time is up, sir. Mr. Cornyn, what would you do?
Well, I know we all celebrate with the family of Nina Pham, her good diagnosis, having been cured now of the disease. I saw that she was with the president. I think it was even this afternoon in the Oval Office. But yes, I've called for a travel ban from those affected West African nations, increased surveillance as we pursue a vaccine through wonderful institutions like the Galveston National Lab and the UTMB, University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston, and other world-class medical facilities that we have. Unfortunately, Dallas was not prepared, primarily because they were looking for guidance from the federal government. And the Center for Disease Control was giving inconsistent or inadequate incomplete advice on the protocol that the healthcare providers were supposed to use to protect themselves. So thankfully, people who came in casual contact were not infected. The people we thought were at the lowest risk were, basically because there was no leadership from the White House and from the federal government.
Angel Pedrero has the next question.
Thank you, Wendy. This question is for both. 3,000 children in Texas are using medicinal marijuana to get better, but their parents get the cannabis out of Texas. Would you support the legalization of medicinal marijuana in the country?
Mr. Cornyn.
I believe that it would be dangerous and risky for us to approve the use of marijuana for this purported medicinal reason. We see experimentation taking place all across our country in places like Colorado, where now marijuana is being openly sold as a recreational drug, with no real knowledge of what the results of this experiment will be in terms of public safety and public health. And as we know now, underage individuals, children, get access to alcohol, even though we know it's not legal for them to do so. So I don't think it take a great speculation to say that this will, if approved for adults, will make its way to children who its impact on their growing and forming brains and their productivity is really unknown. So I do not support the legalization of marijuana.
Mr. Alameel.
Well, of course, many Christians thought alcohol was Satan, and they had the same argument back when they did the alcohol prohibition era. First of all, the question was about medical marijuana, and I think medical marijuana should be available to patients who need it. Second, I think most of the people being arrested and going to prison are African American and Latino kids, disproportionately so, even though the Anglo population are using it much more than that community. So I believe it's time to have those kids go back to their families, and it's time to decriminalize marijuana and make it more like a civil fine. And I think that will go a long way to allow the Latino community and the African American community to unite with those young people who never committed any violent crime. And I'm sure we will have to deal with our young people the way we do with alcohol, but having prohibition like we tried before did not work. We wasted trillions of dollars on this drug war that doesn't work. And I think marijuana should be decriminalized so people will either pay a fine or do a community service.
Your time is up, sir.
Thank you.
Pedro Rojas, do you want to rebuttal?
No.
Pedro Rojas has the next question.
Thank you, Wendy. And this question is for both Senator Cornyn and Mr. Alameel. As we all know, this Ebola crisis that we just have here originated at the Texas Presbyterian Hospital here in Dallas, put on the table the realities of some weaknesses in the healthcare system throughout the country. If any of you gets elected as a senator of the state of Texas, would you promote any changes in the Senate to make hospital management more accountable to their patients, their employees, and the public?
Mr. Alameel, you will answer first.
Well, of course, our hospitals, like everything else in our healthcare system, is for profit. And sometimes people go too far with profits. They start cutting corners. The Dallas hospital that had this outbreak did not have proper equipment. Even after their patient went to be treated, they still did not have the gear necessary to take care of them. And they tried to muzzle the staff from complaining. I think everything has to do with us having a plan. We have 4 centers in the country to handle Ebola, and the total number in the country is 9 beds. So if we have an epidemic, the first 9 patients will be taken care of, and the other 100,000 will die. Yes, we need to take care of our response system, like I said before, and we need to fund it.
Mr. Cornyn, please.
Well, I visited with Judge Jenkins and Mayor Rawlings, as well as Dr. Lakey, the Chief Medical Officer for the state of Texas, about this. And what struck me is that they were waiting for guidance from the White House, from the federal government. And it took the president 3 weeks before he appointed a liaison officer, sometimes called a czar. But we don't need any more czars. What we needed is somebody to coordinate the care between the federal government, state, and local government to make sure that the emergency resources we had were available and they were acting on the best possible information. So Texas Presbyterian Hospital and the county did the best they could, but they were handicapped by a lack of help and useful guidance from the federal government. The Center for Disease Control has world-class epidemiologists and doctors, but they aren't the kinds of boots on the ground needed to guide and to direct people who are trying to save the life of somebody like Mr. Duncan, who are real heroes.
We have to move forward to next question. Julieta Hernandez, please.
Senator Cornyn, according to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, 27% of young adults did not have health insurance in 2012. Part of your efforts as a senator has been to put an end to Obamacare. What programs would you instead implement to decrease the percentage of young Americans without insurance?
Well, it's true that the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, was supported by its advocates as a solution to our broken health care system. There were many people like me who were skeptical that the federal government had the competence or the ability to change the law, especially using the tools they did, that would actually cover more people. In fact, there's still today 42 million people who lack health care insurance, even now 4 years into Obamacare's passage. And we're found that all of the promises that were made, if you like your doctor, you can keep them, they proved not to be true. Because unfortunately, what the federal government did is made health insurance more expensive, not less expensive and more affordable. So I have a plan to put in place an alternative that would let you choose your health care and would bring down prices primarily by increasing competition and making it more transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, Obamacare is no different than Romney Care, which John Cornyn did not have a problem with it. It's a good step in the right direction. It's already helped 5 million people to get insurance. It also changed our health care. For the first time in history, insurance companies cannot drop a patient when he gets sick by not renewing his policy. For the first time in history, when he moves from job to job, they cannot tell him you have pre-existing condition. They have to cover him. For the first time, they allow kids to remain on their parents' policy. Yes, it's not perfect. We need to make it more affordable, but I think it's a great step in the, in the right direction. It's the law of the land, and Republicans need to stop saying no and start figuring out how to help and fix it.
We're going to move forward to the next question. Angel.
Thank you, Wendy. Dr. Alameel.
Yes, sir.
You say that increasing the minimum federal wage to $10.10 is a good proposal, and if so, would you be willing to apply that increase in your business before it becomes law?
Well, minimum wage in my company that I sold in 2009 was $10 an hour. We used to pay Latina and Latinos straight out of high school, $10 an hour. It was great for my business. They became good consumers for my neighbor's business. They also became very loyal employees. They also became people who stayed there, and we didn't have to train other people. The more employees make, the more consumer make. The more consumer make, the more small business will profit. And I think it's a silly argument that minimum wage hurt business.
Mm-hmm. Next question from Pedro.
Senator Cornyn, will you support, changing gears here, will you support the deployment of U.S. troops to the ground in Iraq to fight the terrorist group ISIL? And if so, how many soldiers should be deployed?
Well, I'm waiting for the president to tell us what his strategy is to degrade and defeat the Islamist State. He recognizes, I think we all have to recognize, that it is a threat not only to the peace in the Middle East, but as we learned on September the 11th, 2001, what happens over there can have a very direct impact on our safety and security here. But I don't believe the president's current tactics of airstrikes alone are adequate. Don't take my word for it. You can ask Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You can ask former Secretary of Defense for President Obama, Leon Panetta, and both of them have said that. Ideally, if we could recruit allies like Turkey, like the Kurds, the Peshmerga, and others, Iraqi soldiers, for them to be the boots on the ground, we should do that. But the fact of the matter is, we in America have capabilities that no one else has. And if we don't stop it there, then we could be well defending ourselves here, and
Your
that
time is up, sir.
unacceptable.
Well, of course, John Cornyn has been saying he wants boots on the ground since this crisis started. And I say our president is doing right by bombing them to degrade them. And before we put boots on the ground and end up like another Iraqi war, we need to have a foreign policy vision. We need to have a plan. We need to decide what our goals are in the Middle East. It's a domino effect type of region, and we don't need to create another big war. But if we have a good vision and a good plan, I will support our military to take care of them because they are a threat to our country.
Next question is from Julieta Hernandez.
Dr. Alameel,
Yes, ma'am.
do you support funding for non-citizens for tuition for higher education?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Ángel Pedrero.
Thank you, Wendy. Senator Cornyn, from all the decisions that you have made in your 12 years in the Senate, which one you regret the most, or would you rather say that you have never made a mistake in your tenure?
Well, I would never say that I have not made any mistakes. My wife is in the audience, and she would disagree if I said that. So, of course, we all make mistakes in life, and hopefully we learn from them. One of the things I regret is that when we passed the prescription drug program for Medicare to make prescription drugs available for seniors, that we didn't insist that it be paid for. And that was a mistake, because what we've seen is there's a bipartisan tendency to want to do things but not to pay for them. And this has happened over a period of time to where now we have $17 trillion in debt. And someone is going to have to pay that back. Unfortunately, it's going to be the next generation is going to have to pay that back. And that's immoral for us to be spending money today and giving them the bill to pay back in the future. That's why I support a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution to force the Congress to do what states do.
Time is up.
We all should do.
Well, of course, I learned more from my mistakes in life than I learned from my successes. That's why I'm successful today. You have to turn every stumbling block, every stumbling stone into a stepping stone to reach higher. And I think I have made many mistakes. One of them was John Cornyn. But there's nothing wrong with making mistakes as long as you learn from it. We all have to learn. I still learn. I'm already 62 years old, and every day I'm learning something new. And it's okay to make mistakes.
Mr. Pedro Ros has another question.
This question is for Dr. Alameel. Dr. Alameel, you have traveled throughout the state promoting your political platform, and I was reading a little bit about it, and I found out that you would like to obligate big banks to pay their fair share in taxes and create more jobs by doing that. Can you explain, please, more in detail about those ideas?
Remember about that establishment in Washington? They passed special legislations so that companies can hide profits overseas for deferred profits, and they don't pay taxes till they bring it home. They have trillions and trillions of dollars that they're hiding in overseas. They also gave them the ability to do production overseas, like in China, produce a product for $5, sell it to its subsidiary in Cayman Island for $95, and then the subsidiary will sell it to us for $100 and claim $5 profits. There are many ways that big corporations are cheating the system. Another one is they gave them special privileges, special outsourcing tax incentive to pay them to take our jobs overseas. It's very simple. We reverse those policies, and we will get our jobs back.
Senator Cornyn, do you see this possibility, this idea feasible? You've been around this Congress and Senate for the last 12 years. Is it possible to overturn the status quo, so to speak, that the big corporations have in this country?
Well, we need to change the status quo because it's hurting American jobs and investment here. We have the highest corporate rate in the world, and I was at the Dallas Hispanic Chamber today at lunch, and a small businesswoman told me that she's at the 30% tax rate, but large multinational corporations have the lawyers and the accountants and basically can manipulate the current system and end up paying zero in effective tax rate. That's wrong. and we shouldn't be forcing her in her small business here in North Texas to subsidize, in effect, the activities of a multinational corporation that has a team of lawyers and accountants. So I support a flatter, fairer, simpler tax rate. I think that will help grow the economy and encourage investment and create more jobs. Unfortunately, the Obama administration has told us that it will take about $1 trillion in new taxes for them to agree to come to the table, and that's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Our student from Mountain View College has the next question. Julieta, please.
These questions go for both. Would you support a federal abortion law similar to the new abortion law recently enacted in Texas?
Mr. Cornyn, you will answer first.
I believe that, well, personally, I will tell you that I am pro-life. That's my view, and those are my values. But I believe that women's health is important if they are seeking abortions lawfully, and that the steps that Texas took to improve the clinics to make sure that women did not suffer malpractice and poor treatment there was a step in the right direction. The problem we saw in Pennsylvania, for example, is when Dr. Kermit Gosnell, basically, he was a human butcher, and women died seeking otherwise lawful abortions at his facility. We can't let that happen here, and I believe that the steps the Texas legislature took were steps in the right direction.
Mr. Alameel, you have 1 minute to answer that question.
In case you didn't notice, the first question last time, he made my case about my economic platform. Second, his answer just now, he just declared he's pro-choice. So I'm Catholic like him, and we don't believe in abortion, but we respect the others, and we want them to have good facilities like he said he would. So we agree on this.
Angel Pedrero has the next question.
Thank you, Wendy. This question is for both. Can you explain your position about same-sex marriage? Could you support a constitutional amendment to define what marriage is?
Well, I believe the issue of marriage should be decided at the state level by the people of our state, and the people of Texas have made that judgment, and we should not have unelected judges force a different policy other than that voluntarily chosen by the people of our state. I would say I am pro-traditional marriage. I believe that's good for families and good for the country, but I understand the Supreme Court has now basically said this matter should be decided at the state level, and I believe the verdict of the people of Texas in favor of traditional marriage should be respected.
Pedro Rojas,
Okay.
you want to add something, Mr. Alameel?
Yeah, if I have a rebuttal, I'd like to.
Yes, sir. Remember that you cannot make any noise before we continue. You cannot make any noise or applaud. Mr. Alameel, you have the word.
Yes, of course, I'm Catholic, and I believe God told us, love one another the way I have loved thee. And I love every human the way God loved us. And the Constitution always said that everybody has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I believe that lesbian and gays have the same right as everybody else, and we should move on from these divisive issues.
Next question, Pedro, please.
This question is for both as well. Should English be declared the official language of the United States, and should other languages spoken by minorities be considered or embraced for the purpose of processing official documents and legal agreements?
Mr. Alameel, you will answer first.
I'm always leery when somebody starts saying something ought to be the official language. In a way, it is official language, but we're allowing people to have time to learn the English language. I think nobody can become successful in America unless they learn the English language. Every immigrant, every undocumented person should learn English, their kids should learn English, and they will become successful like I became successful, and I will encourage everybody to learn English. Until they do, we ought to help them and gear them toward that path.
Mr. Cornyn.
I agree with Dr. Alameel.
Now, should English then, should other languages being used for documents, for let's say, an agreement, a lease agreement, that sort of thing, or not?
In places where it's needed, sure. We don't want to abandon millions of people and their right to participate just because they haven't learned the language yet. We've always had that problem. We had it with the Irish, we had it with the German, we have it with the Italian, and now we have it with the Latinos. And it's up to us to help them participate until they learn the language. There's nothing wrong with that.
What would be your view?
Go ahead.
I don't agree with that statement, because we have to understand that we are a common people with a common language, and we can all come from different places. We can speak other languages too. I know Governor at the time, George W. Bush, used to talk about English plus as being the good policy. But every immigrant family understands, as the doctor said, that in order to be successful in America, English is a language you need to learn and need to speak. That doesn't mean we disrespect people who come from other countries who also speak other languages, but we encourage them to assimilate. America is really not just a place, really it's an idea. It's a place where people come from many different backgrounds and different parts of the world, and we become Americans. And English is our common language. But that doesn't mean we forget about who we are or where we came from. And we have to show due respect to that, but also acknowledge that English is the language in which business is done and the language people need to learn in order to be successful.
You have 60 seconds.
I've said what I need to say. It's not how much you say, it's what you say. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. And this question is for both of you. Assuming you are really interested in a comprehensive immigration reform, why should we believe that you will be the one able to break the deadlock surrounding it in Congress? This time, Mr. Alameel, you will answer first.
Well, of course, my wife, Martha's family is from Zacatecas, Mexico. I'm an immigrant. My children are children of immigrants. I've been living in the Latino communities all my life, and I know that this is very important to them and very important to me. It's very important for us to recognize that immigrants make our country stronger. And I will, like I said, I will fight for tooth and nail for immigration reform. And I can tell you one thing is that the Republicans are never going to do immigration reform, but they have their base that tell them to go home. And I have talked to Republicans many times when I used to help them 10 years ago about immigration reform, and each and every one of them say, send them home and make them stand in line in their country. Thank you.
Mr. Cornyn.
Well, I don't agree with the characterization of Dr. Alameel about my position or the position of most Republicans. But I support, as I said earlier, immigration reform, but I think we do have a crisis of confidence in Washington. And primarily that's because of the promises that have been made by the current administration in health care, on the economy, on national security, on so many fronts. And people are really beginning to wonder, can we believe what you say? Will you actually, if we pass a law, will you actually enforce the law the way Congress passes? This president has taken extraordinary liberties at saying, I have a pen and a phone, and I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to go around Congress. I'm not going to work with Congress. That's not the way our Constitution was written. Our Constitution was written to force us to work together on a bipartisan basis to build consensus. So it can't be my way or the highway. That kind of attitude will yield absolutely zero.
Yes, sir.
John Cornyn voted against the DREAM Act and immigration reform. John Cornyn never stood up to his Republican friends when they demeaned, ridiculed, and bashed the Latino community on a constant basis. I don't recall him defending the Latino community when they said that Latinos have big calves because they're drug mules. I wouldn't hold my breath for Republicans to offer you any immigration reform.
Okay, this question is for both of you. Should the term limit be reduced for members of the Senate as much as the House members that have to be elected every 2 years? This time, Mr. Cornyn will answer first.
Well, the reason why senators are elected statewide and for a 6-year term is presumably to give us the opportunity to make longer range decisions and policies for the American people. I think it serves the American people well. Every 6 years we get to vote on our candidates, for office, we can vote for them or kick them out of office if we don't think they're doing a good job. I think the term limits that are provided by elections are the best kinds of term limits. I wouldn't do something that would empower the lobbyists or the staff, the permanent staff, because they would not be responsive to the will of my constituents, the 26.5 million people that live here. I am because I work for them. I work for you. And that's the reason why I believe that 6-year terms are appropriate. Otherwise, you're going to have senators scurrying around the state every 2 years. They'd never have time for anything else.
Mr. Alameel, you have 60 seconds.
I agree that election is a term limit process, but unfortunately, I'm beginning to realize more and more that the longer people stay in Washington, the more beholden they are to big lobbyists who spend so many billions of dollars a year to buy our government. And if we cannot get this big money out of Washington, we ought to make term limits.
I would like to make another question, and it's for both of you. How will you address the need for undocumented immigrants who are not qualified to receive benefits, the opportunity to receive affordable health insurance? This time, Mr. Alameel will answer first.
Well, we have to do immigration reform. It's one of the best ways to solve most of the problems the Latino community have, because every Latino community is either a relative or a friend that they care about who's suffering from not having their documentation. But unless we do that, I don't think there is a way to really legally help them, and that's why I believe that as long as Republicans are obstructing immigration reform, they're hurting the Latino community. It's about their families. It's about their health. It's about putting food on the table. It's about their education. We have to do immigration reform. It solves most of the Latino community problem that they're suffering from.
Mr. Cornyn.
I agree that we need to deal with the issue of immigration reform and that would be the best approach to this particular problem of access to health care. Right now, anyone who goes to an emergency room of a hospital is entitled to be treated basically without any compensation. But we all know that's not the best way for people to receive care. Many times they wait too long or get too sick, and indeed they're far more expensive to treat than they would have been if their condition had been addressed earlier. But I think that is going to require us to come to grips with this broken immigration system, something I'm willing to do. You know, I hear the doctor talk about doing this, and he lambasts the other party, but the fact is you can't get anything done in Washington unless you do it on a bipartisan basis. It's impossible. That's the way our system is constructed. So I would look to work with Democrats, people like Henry Cuellar, who I mentioned earlier, that I've worked with on immigration issues, and we need to get some things done to fix that.
We are approaching to the end of the program, and therefore I ask for candidate David Alameel to give us your closing statement. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Okay. The San Antonio Express News recently wrote that John Cornyn has never led as a senator. The Houston Chronicle added that John Cornyn could not cite a single accomplishment in all his 12 years in the Senate. Wow. Talking about a do-nothing senator. Our country burns while Cornyn fiddles. We need to provide a first-class education for all our children, not just the privileged few. We need to rebuild our own industrial economy right here in America, not in China. We need to make Wall Street Corporation pay taxes on those trillions and trillions of dollars they hide in offshore accounts. We have to eliminate unfair trade agreements that punish the American economy. We have to eliminate those outsourcing tax incentives so we can finally bring our manufacturing jobs back home from overseas. It's time to put America first and put our own families back to work. And if John Trickle-Down Cornyn loves his Wall Street factories in China so much, then maybe he and his Wall Street buddies ought to move to China and leave us alone to rebuild our own economy for the benefit of the people of these United States of America. Our party, Democratic Party, that pulled us out of the Great Depression, gave us 50 years of the best education, the best economy, and the best middle class in the world. need to distance itself from Wall Street and go back to its roots so we can restore the American dream. The American dream for all people. It's time for change in America. And as your senator, I will lead that change. I'm David Alameel, and tonight I humbly ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cornyn, you have 2 minutes for your closing statements.
Well, thank you, Wendy, to you and our panel and Univision for sponsoring this exchange of views, and Mountain View College for providing us the venue and this wonderful opportunity. And I hope those listening online and who will watch the Univision broadcast tomorrow night or the C-SPAN replay next week will get useful information out of this. It's been an honor and privilege for me to serve in the United States Senate, representing all Texans, whether they voted for me or not. It's my responsibility and privilege to do so. And I think that Dr. Alameel is exactly wrong when he says that the American dream is out of reach. He is an example of the American dream working. Somebody coming to the country with nothing, working hard, and becoming very wealthy in the process and creating jobs. I think that American dream should be available to everyone. But right now on the path that we're on in Washington, D.C., nothing seems to be working the way it should. That's the reason why Congress and the President's approval ratings are in the tank, because nothing is getting solved. I believe we need a new direction. We need new management. We need new leadership. And I think the American people are ready to give Republicans a chance to lead, because clearly under the status quo under the last few years, under Majority Leader Harry Reid and President Obama, the country is not better off. We are worse off. But we're only a few decisions away from, I think, the sort of opportunity and growth in our economy and jobs that we need in this country to keep the American dream alive. Unfortunately, Washington has gotten in the way, and it's time for Washington to get out of the way, and they need to look no further than the state of Texas for the sorts of policies and the type of governance which has created prosperity, which have caused people to vote with their feet and to come in here at the rate of more than 1,000 a day. So thank you very much.
Thank you to both of you. And ladies and gentlemen, this marks the conclusion of Destino 2014. I would like to invite the candidates' families to come on stage. And thank you so much. Have a good night.